Welcome to the latest episode of Take Back Our Schools. My name is Andrew Gutman. I am with my esteemed co-host, Beth Feely. We are two parents, two accidental activists that didn't like what was going on in the schools of our children. And now on this podcast, we talk about what is going on in the educational system broadly and all the bad things about it, but also how we can potentially fix it. So today we have an interesting guest that I will let Beth, you introduce.
Thanks, Andrew. Today, we're very excited to welcome a remarkable young woman who firsthand has seen the life-changing impact of quality education and other factors make in making a difference in a young person's life. So we welcome Denisha Merriweather, who currently serves as the Director of Public Relations and Content Marketing at the American Federation for Children. And she's also the founder of Black Minds Matter. Denisha previously served as a confidential assistant political appointee at the U.S. Department of Education under Secretary Betsy DeVos. And Denisha is also a former Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Program student who was the first in her family to graduate from high school and college, and has her master's degree as well in social work from the University of South Florida. Her story has been featured in a variety of local and national news stories, and I also had the pleasure of meeting Denisha at the old Parkland Conference this past weekend. So timing was great on that front. It was great to meet you in person. So welcome, Denisha.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Beth, for having me, and thanks, Andrew, for having me.
So, I'd love to start with your story of growing up in Eastside, which is an area in Jacksonville, and which at one point was a thriving Black community, but then fell on hard times. What happened and what was growing up like there for you?
Yeah, the east side of Jacksonville is really, it still is just a hard place for community members to live. But when I was growing up on the east side, it was a place where people would walk around aimlessly, without hope. A lot of high school dropouts, a lot of crime, police presence, and not much going on. There were not a lot of businesses in the neighborhood. And the schools that are on the east side are all underperforming. They were underperforming when I went there, and they're still underperforming. So it really is just, you would think that the east side of Jacksonville would be affluent because of where it is in the city. But it's not. You have the port, which brings in, all of merchandise and equipment on one side, downtown Jacksonville, which it literally sits right next to the Jaguar Stadium, the fairgrounds, the baseball stadium. And then on the other side, you have historic Springfield, which is a affluent area. And so you would think that the urban core, which is what they commonly call the east side of Jacksonville, would be, more affluent, but it's not. And it's quite sad to see that the east side has not changed for the better in all these years.
So I know from your story that education was a big part of it, and you made a big switch, I think, early in your life, and it kind of made a huge difference in your life. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So growing up, I went to about, I would say, 4 to 5 different elementary schools. My family, we moved around a lot. I didn't know that at the time we were homeless. That word did never correlate with our situation, but it wasn't until I was in grad school, learned the true definition of homelessness, that I realized we were homeless. We lived on, family members' couches. We lived in hotel rooms. We were, hopping around from one place to another. And I never had that stability. As far as education, I hated school. It was not a place that I wanted to go. I knew that the only reason why I had to go to school was so that my mother wouldn't go to jail, because that had actually happened before. She'd been locked up because she wasn't sending us to school. This would be, for any reason. If it was too hot, if it was raining, if we were too tired, we just wouldn't go to school.
And you had siblings?
I did. Yeah, I do. So I'm the oldest of four. Well, five. There are five of us. So I'm the oldest of five. And yeah. And so we just wouldn't go to school. And I went to my local public schools from K-5, and I didn't like it. I mean, it didn't feel like home. It didn't feel like anyone really cared about me. I failed the third grade twice because I couldn't read. And I just knew I was dumb. I knew I was stupid. I knew I was incapable of learning, that I was a failure. And those internal feelings, those internal insecurities were never, debunked by my teachers.
I was just going to ask, was it teachers or the environment or fellow students, or what were some of the kind of root causes of you feeling like you were a failure and had no potential?
I would say all of the above. When I was feeling like when I had low self-esteem, and I would try my hand at something in school, would try to read out loud, and the teacher would, dismiss me to go to the next student, because it was just too painful for her ears to hear me try to, get through a passage, that, contributed to it. And then also students laughing at me and picking on me and saying like, ha, that's why you're dumb, So I would say all of the above, and not receiving any help, any additional help, or from my home life, from my biological, mother. And so I would say all of the above contributed to it. And I remember in the fourth grade, I was accepted into this program, for elementary school students who were behind 2, 3, 4 grade levels. And this is elementary school. So I was enrolled in this program. It was called the STAR program. And I didn't pass it. So I left that program being 2 grade levels behind, because I failed the third grade twice, still being 2 grade levels behind when I got out of this program. And that weighed on me. So by the 5th grade, I was just like, nah, I don't care about this. This can all sink to the ground. I remember wearing pajamas in school, like just rolling out of bed and whatever I had on, walking to school. Like it didn't matter to me at all. And that for the better part of my childhood, from K to 5th, that was my attitude toward school, toward learning. I thought that I would become like some of the rest of my family members who had dropped out of school, had babies while they were, teenagers. And I would probably have a job. I'd probably work at a fast food restaurant. I often tell people, because I like money. I always have wanted my own. So I'm the oldest. So it's like, always having to share. So I think I would have had a job, making money.
But then you made a switch.
I did.
And it changed
Sorry,
things,
yeah,
right? So go to that. Because obviously you're not dumb and you're not stupid, and yeah. you obviously are very well educated. So what happened?
Yeah, what happened? So I got a scholarship. So the summer before my 6th grade year, I began to live permanently with my godmother. And that was the first,
Can I stop you? I'm sorry to interrupt. Your choice, your biological mother's choice. How did that happen? Okay.
Question. It was my choice, actually. And it was pretty emotional as a 13-year-old, going to your biological mother saying, I can't do this anymore. I am leaving. And that was a choice that I made at the age of 13 to go live with my godmother. She definitely, her hands were tied. There had been, which I found out later on, when I was little, court battles, but I would say that at 13, I made that decision myself to live with my godmother. And so she empowered me and waited outside, and we drove off. And that's when everything changed. And She found a school for me. She found this small private school that her church had started, and she didn't have a way to pay for it. Her income was not significantly, better. She wasn't, making all this money that she could afford private school tuition. And she found an after school program for me. So it was like these two things. Everything kind of, my entire environment changed. I began to live in a home that was stable. I began to go to a new school, and I went after school. I was not a latchkey kid. I went to an after school program where I spent all that afternoon. And, back to the education piece, she didn't have a way to pay for private school tuition. And her friend told her about the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Program. And that's when it all, began. I began to go to this small private school on scholarship. Many of the teachers I actually kind of knew because I had gone to the church before. I'd gone to the church with my godmother. It was like night and day. It was like night and day. When I walked into the school, first couple of days, of course, the teachers are smiling. They're, hugging you. We're so happy to have you. Billboards are like decorated to the T, like had artists, these teachers. And I was like, this is gonna last 1 week. I was used to this. I've been to so many different schools. I already knew the routine, but it didn't. Every single day, that was the difference maker for me. These teachers greeted us with smiles and hugs, and it was a Christian school. They even prayed for us. If we came in looking, they would pray for us. And that was my first, like maybe this school is different.
There are other students, if I can interrupt, that had similar challenges like you had, that had come to that school for similar reasons, or what was kind of the student makeup at your school, at your new school?
Honestly, I don't know. I honestly don't know. Which could be a good thing, the student, everyone was of the same, like, to me, I felt like the outsider. I felt like the imposter because everyone else was at such a different level, at such a different standard, I guess. Firstly, like I mentioned, I would wear pajamas to school. I didn't really care about my appearance at all. Well, I went to this private school. We had a uniform that was structured from the head to the toe. And students prided themselves in how they came to school looking. And so you had students, like everyone's shirt was ironed. Our skirts were pleated, our shoes, everything, our little beret, everything had a different standard of excellence. And that's how the students presented themselves too. So I don't know actually if other students had struggled with similar things, like me. That's a good question.
But it sounds like that you rose to that. And
That's
we
right.
should add that by the 6th grade, you were making honor roll, which is pretty impressive, especially given making a transition into a new school. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, in your actual classes, what was different? How the teachers ran the classes, things like that?
Yeah, I did. I went from making D's and F's to A's and B's. I went from believing that I was a failure to just realizing that the public school system had failed me. And the teachers at this new school never let up. They never let me get into my rut of thinking that I was dumb, that I was stupid, that I couldn't do it. They didn't come with that deficit mindset. I would be sitting in class, and teacher would call and obviously teachers always just do this, call on someone to read. I would not be the one raising my hand, like, call on me, the one who's gonna stumble over every word. But the teachers would call on me. In 6th grade, I remember Miss Hart, she would call on me and I would just sit hyperventilating, crying, sobbing, trying to get through this passage. She would not budge. She would not go to a different student. She will wait patiently. She helped me, to get to sound out words. And it wasn't in a disgruntled way. It was in such a loving way. The students never laughed. I felt like I could be vulnerable in that sense, to open up and to just admit basically that I needed help. And they were there to do it. They saw the potential that I had, and I didn't see that in myself. And I went from making D's and F's to A's and B's. And that definitely boosted my confidence a lot. It wasn't a grade that I just got because I was socially, promoted or anything like that. I definitely worked at it.
So how long did it take you? Sorry, how long did it take you from you're a few grade levels behind when you come in to, again, honor roll at some point. So How long did it take you to feel comfortable? You said, I belong here. I'm on par with all the other students. Was that a year, a couple of years?
Yes, a good question. Even today, it's sad to say the model that I live by is I do not believe, the reason why I work in this area of education reform is because I deeply am passionate about no child should experience trauma in school. And I struggle with imposter syndrome till today. And I know where it stemmed from, of believing that I'm not enough, not qualified, not deserving. So I like to say that it stopped, the year that I got to, a year after I got to Esprit de Corps, 2 years. But I struggled all the time, that I had to prove myself. I had to show my worth. And so much I was third in my class, valedictorian, salutatorian. I was third. And wow. I was so so upset because I felt like I had to prove myself, and I did not, which, they should have earned it. The valedictorian, she made straight A's since kindergarten, and the salute. Yeah. So but I was like, can I take another college credit to, get above them? And so I would say it kind of still lasts, to be honest, but that's a good question.
So let's fast forward a little bit. I mean, you're now, as a professional, advocating for, other children to, have the kind of experience that you do. You started something called Black Minds Matter. Let's talk about that a little bit. What is that? What's the purpose of that organization, and why did you do that?
Yeah, I started advocating for school choice, education freedom, options. We call it so many different things. When I was about 15 years old, I saw that my life was drastically different from my own siblings' lives. I saw that the opportunities that I had was different from the opportunities that many of the people I had gone to elementary school with, many of the people in my own biological family and community had. And I just began to question, I'm not that special. I am not that smart, obviously. How was I able to make it, and
just have to jump in and respectfully disagree with that statement. But point well taken.
Yeah, well, it is something like, what if other students had the same opportunity I had? That was my question. And I just began to listen. During that time in Florida, the teachers union had sued the program, and that's kind of when I became activated. There was a bill expansion in Florida, where Governor Charlie Crist, he was a Republican at the time, signed the expansion bill of the tax credit into law, and then ran again as governor as a Democrat and said that his hands were tied. He was forced to do this. So I just began to listen, and I got the signing pin. I should mention that. That's why my ears were perked up and I was so angry. So I at an early age, I began to learn about politics and education. And when the summer of 2020, when we had social unrest across the country, so that's how I got involved in education reform professionally since 15. And I should finish that by saying, graduated from grad school, went to work at the U.S. Department of Education with Secretary Betsy DeVos, and then went to work at the American Federation for Children, where I am now, and launched Black Minds Matter. And I launched that the summer of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered in the country. Every organization, it seemed, was looking internally at their system saying, are we racist? Is there any remnant of inequality in our systems? And from syrup bottles, we had a syrup and pancake company saying that we're going to change and rebrand because, there's some remnants of racism here. No one was looking at the education system saying that we have some really disparate outcomes for Black students in this country. And maybe we should look at that. Maybe we should change how we do things in the public school space, because in the education reform space and school choice space, we're graduating Black students. We are providing them, they're reading, they're going to college. But in the public school space, they're going to prison. We've coined it the school to prison pipeline. Mm-hmm. And maybe we should look at that. And so it started with an op-ed that I wrote, just laying out these frustrations, saying, why haven't we looked at this? And it really snowballed into a movement, into a national initiative that we have now, which is so exciting. One of the wonderful things that I get the pleasure of working on is our Black-owned school directory, which is highlighting the education entrepreneurs who are Black, and they have started schools across the country. And many of these schools would not be operable if it wasn't for choice programs. So yeah, that's a little bit about Black Minds Matter.
Yeah, and I've read, I checked out the Black Minds Matter website, and the directory is really interesting. And I was reading also about some of the schools, and one that I was reading about, some of the schools are promoting being an all-Black school. And I just wanted to see kind of, what is your take on that? There is some research that's often quoted about it being important that Black kids have Black teachers, and just wanted to kind of see where you fall on that.
Yeah, many of the schools on the directory they're very diverse. And all of the founders that I've talked to, their reasoning for wanting to start a school has been because of the negative effects that they've seen Black students have in public schools. So they're passion driven, mission focused. And I would say the schools are very diverse. So I've interacted with Montessori, schools, farm schools that's out in nature, micro schools with chickens, in their living room. And so they're pretty diverse with different diverse bodies. But as far as I am not an advocate under Black Minds Matter. We are not advocating for Black kids to go to Black owned schools. That's not the position of BMM. I want to show that because of school choice, we know that school choice has impacted the lives of students and parents. We know that from my own experience, I know that. But we also have seen where school choice has created a spirit of entrepreneurship for people wanting to create innovative learning environments for students, and more options. And so that's the goal, to highlight these people, to show that they're doing some pretty cool things out there. And let's hear about their story, and let's make them into super advocates, champions for the cause.
And just to clarify what the American Federation for Children's mission is, or kind of belief, they believe in choice, and that includes having high-performing public schools. Do they not?
No, that's right. We're agnostic. We don't care about where a parent sends their kid to school. We're not getting into the weeds about a type of curriculum a school is teaching. We want to make sure that every parent is empowered to send their kid to the school that they want their kid to go to, that's, specific to that kid's interests, their needs, their values. And it's our job as an organization to make sure that all of those resources are there for that family to choose the best school for their kid. So if that's creating a new policy, if that's, to ensure that there are scholarships, to ensure that there's enough charter schools in the place, that's our role.
I want to ask you, it's kind of a difficult question. I want to put you on the spot and get your views, both given your story and given what you now do professionally in this, school choice movement. We always hear from the teachers unions, we need more money. Schools are underperforming because we don't have enough resources. Do you think that any kid can do what you did, can benefit if they're in a school with caring, attentive teachers, or, is it not any kid? I mean, in other words, you had to make a change. You went from living with, your biological mother to your godmother, who's clearly, I'm guessing, part of the story why, you were incentivized to do well in school. So in your opinion, how much is family a part of the story? How much is being in the right environment or community or peers or siblings part of the story? And how much is it the school specifically, the quality of the teachers and the education part of the story?
Yeah, well, that's a lot packed into one.
It is.
So I would say, one, to your first point, our opposition, those who don't believe in freedom in education, they're constantly saying we need to pour more money into the public school system. The problem is we don't have enough money. And if we had enough money, then all of these outcomes would, disappear. Then we would graduate kids. We would teach kids how to read. Well, the thing that's most interesting is, the average public school in America, the average per pupil funding is about $13,000. Per student. And then the average scholarship cost is about $7,000 to $8,000 for a kid to go to private school. Charter schools don't get the same amount of funding as their traditional public school counterparts. So what's their, excuse? How are they able to crack the code, which with significantly less funding? So we know funding is not the issue. The issue really is the bureaucracy. I wouldn't say that the issue is public schools, because we have some amazing teachers in public schools who complain that their hands are tied, that they want to do things for students and they're not able to because of the bureaucracy. They're terrified of the teachers union. Off the record, we've talked to many teachers who don't want their stories to be highlighted because they're terrified of the teachers union. That's not a way to, educate kids. They know that they don't want to teach to a test, but they know that that's how they got to keep their jobs. If their students are going to, pass this test, that's how they're going to, get into administration and keep all of their benefits. So money is not the issue. And then as far as, nature versus nurture, was it because of family, or was it because of, my environment being at school? I would say, my story is unique to me. All of those different things happened at the same time, which was a godsend. But over the years on our website, voicesforchoice.net, we have over 800 stories of parents and students and teachers who've benefited from school choice. And their stories are so diverse. One of the students who I love her to pieces, Ashley Elliott, her teacher pulled her from the public school system. She was a teacher at public school and was Ashley's teacher. And when she left to go work at Victory Christian Academy, she took Ashley with her. She's like, you're coming with me. And her education outcome changed. She was enrolled on scholarship program to pay for the private school tuition. And her academic outcomes changed. The teacher left for those same reasons. She felt like her hands were tied and she couldn't really help her students. And she convinced Ashley's grandmother to let her come to this school with her. So everyone's story is different, but I would say the thing that is similar is that a child is a minor. They need someone, someone to take interest in them, in their life, in their academic achievement, in how they are doing educationally. And so I think that is what is needed. Ashley's living situation didn't change, but someone took interest in her.
That is a very inspiring story. Thank you for sharing that. And just, wouldn't it be amazing to see that happen, 1,000-fold, 100,000-fold, and what a different state we'd be in with kids and getting better opportunities. One thing that you wrote that I really liked, it's 100% aligned with the philosophy of Robert Woodson, who was at the old Parkland Conference with us. You wrote that too often the education system views Black children, their community, and its challenges through a deficit-based perspective that emphasizes alleged shortcomings inside and out of the classrooms. I want beneficiaries of school choice to advocate for a strengths-based perspective that focuses on the potential of every child. What, I guess you're an example of that. Somebody identified that you had strengths and that you could do better. How do you see this playing out in the schools that you encounter throughout, being affiliated with American Federation for Children? And then also what can be done to further inculcate this mindset?
Yeah. The thing that I see that's most common with schools of choice than the traditional public school, not all the traditional public schools that I've seen, have been, their attitude towards students. They're doing this work, not because they're getting paid a lot of money. Most of the people who are launching schools of choice, be it charter, private, homeschool, micro school, virtual school, they're not getting paid, the same amount as that they would if they were working for the district. Many of them have lost their benefits because they're not, connected to the pension plan and their 401k plan, So they're entrepreneurs. Yeah, they've started these, small schools. And I would say the thing that is most common with all of these schools is they come with passion. They come with really wanting to help students, seeing students as they are, and knowing that it's not because of a system that they're not performing well. It's because they need the environment, to do that. If that makes sense. Like, it's not because of one particular, thing. I wish I could say this better. Like, every student has the potential, and it's their job just to pull it out of them and to work at doing that. That's something that I've seen that's in common, instead of on the reverse, like, oh, this student just can't do it. It's like, can't is not in their vocabulary. Like, no, the student can do it. We just got to pull it out of them. So that kind of
answered Andrew's question to you earlier, actually. I think that was a great answer.
Yeah.
So one last question from me, and then I know Beth wants to talk briefly about the conference you guys were at. But I live in the New York area, blue state. Beth also lives in blue state, Illinois. You're from the free state of Florida, which we're all jealous. Yeah, may come down there soon. But teachers unions so against school choice, against charter schools. They fight it tooth and nail, where Beth and I live. Florida has some really interesting, charter schools, some classical charter schools. Do you, in your work, is there any hope for pushing school choice? And we see a lot of parents now, given what happened with COVID and school closures, there's more momentum, nationally to push these kind of school choice issues. But from your work, do you see any progress being made in, the blue states and fighting the teachers unions on these issues? Or do you think this becomes a, red versus blue, the red states like Florida are going to have school choice and the blue states, forget it. You got the monopoly of the public school systems and that is it. Any thoughts on that?
The teachers unions, they're one of our biggest hurdles when it comes to making education freedom a reality for every student in America. And their influence and impact is so entrenched in states like New York, California's, they really, it's sad how they've infiltrated the education system. But I don't think it's impossible. One of the things, like you mentioned, in your question, is COVID. One of the things that happened in Virginia is using your tagline, parents wanted to take back their schools. They saw that what was being taught in the schools, whatever reason, they were in power. And that was the number one issue area for this last gubernatorial election of why parents stood up: education. And I don't think that it's impossible for more states to mirror Florida. We see it happening. In Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is very blue, but parents are choosing, it's kind of second nature. They funded, the state funds private schools, charter schools, and traditional schools all through the same budget. And that was a pretty momentous, step in a very blue state. But so we have a lot to do. The teachers unions have, caused a lot of fuss. They sued the Florida program twice, and really activated parents so that they could, say, no, we want this program. But it does take that momentum from parents to say, we want this. We are not going to just allow you to teach, do, tell, whatever the onset is. Our students, we want to be empowered. And we see that happening. We see that happening across the country. And I think it's our role as education reformers to harness that so that parents can know where to direct it best.
Yes, both Andrew and I are on also that frontline fight in addition to doing this podcast and many other things. So it was really neat to see people rise up and possibly reconnect in ways that they perhaps hadn't been doing enough of over the past several years, perhaps decades. And so, no, that was a good tidal wave. So, okay, Old Parkland Conference, which you and I were blessed enough to go to. So this was just for the listeners, a meeting that was held at the Old Parkland Conference Center in Dallas. And it was a meeting of public intellectuals, academics, journalists, and grassroots practitioners to discuss upward mobility and persistent inequality, particularly among Blacks in the United States. And it was inspired by a conference called the Fairmont Conference that Thomas Sowell had organized more than 40 years ago. It was hosted by Ian Rowe of AEI and 1776 Unites in a new school that he's launching, an IB school in New York. Glenn Lowry, professor at Brown University, Jason Riley of the Wall Street Journal, and Shelby Steele of the Hoover Institution. Mm-hmm. So, the sessions focused on education, policing, culture, affirmative action, many topics that are quite at the fore. So I took so much from the program, but I'm interested in kind of what some of the highlights were for you.
Yeah, my favorite session was the keynote speech by Shelby Steele. He talked about how, as one of the things, the core of what he believes is the problem or the issue within Black culture and why there hasn't been much advancement in all those buckets that you just mentioned is that we still view ourselves as being oppressed people and not free people, that we are free. And, he had everyone raise their hand, do you believe that we're still oppressed? And I was like, kind of scratching their head like, no. And, we're free, to say those words. We're free. And that was by far my favorite session. And it fits in line with what we advocate for in the education reform space. We advocate for education freedom, for parents to take on the mantle and not be spoon-fed any talking point, any myth, any, system to be free in education, to exercise that freedom, and to not allow anyone to spoon feed you anything that you're not comfortable with, to exercise that right that we have. And he was just a brilliant brain throughout the entire summit, and that keynote speech that he gave was just awesome.
It was. I thought that was terrific. Definitely would commend the book White Guilt to people among his other many incredible works. And, just recounting that story of, this is a man who lived through segregation, whose mother, when she was wheeled into the hospital to give birth to him, she is white, was taken up to the 9th floor. His father, who is Black, comes in and she is taken to the basement. I mean, this is he knows this firsthand. And then for him, the brilliance with which he writes and talks about some of these issues, it resonates very strongly with me. I loved when he said, what would you do if there was no racism?
Yeah.
And again, the hush falls, across the crowd.
Yeah.
And his answer is, then do it.
Yeah.
Don't let this get in. It's a mindset.
Yeah.
And so it was powerful. I call it PTSD, post-traumatic slave disorder. Oh. And I feel like, it really should be a diagnosis in the DSM-5 because a lot of us suffer from it. And we shouldn't suffer from that. It is a mindset. It's more mental. And his speech was psychological, like we have to change this and stop thinking this way. And there are also some who profit over that type of negative disempowered mindset. And I think he coined, at least for me, a new phrase called the Grievance Elite. So I hope to see perhaps an op-ed or have that pop up in some of his writings. I also, a highlight for me too, was Justice Thomas and his keynote discussion at dinner. He, so many great points. And that actually is available. I think I did see that's posted on C-SPAN, so people can Google that and actually see that. But it was interesting, he talked a little bit about the court and the leak and some of the things in the news today. But I also, I loved that he recommended that book, Live Not by Lies. By Alexander, or actually it's an essay by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, just about, that we must continue to pursue truth. We can't be diverted from that. That is something that is, really the bedrock of our society, our institutions. And so I just really appreciated his perspectives. So yes, and it was great to meet you. And also, we mentioned that your family is going to get bigger soon, and congratulations on that. And
Thank you.
So very, very best wishes as you enter that phase.
Yeah,
that's a scary phase, parenthood. For one, and then having to deal with, your kids in the education system one way or another.
I know I'm definitely going to be type A. I'm going to be so type A with all of the different options that's out there. Like, I know the ropes. I've been to so many schools. But I'm so excited. Thank you. Yeah, and it was great to meet you in person, Beth. Normally with the new age that we're in, you meet people virtually over Zoom and then meet them in person, but we actually met in person before we met in Zoom. So we're kind of like going back to the old normal.
Which I love. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on Take Back Our Schools. We really appreciated hearing your perspectives, your life story, and now what you're doing professionally to advance all children's educations with school choice. It's just something that Beth and I really feel strongly about as well. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Beth, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
So I want to talk about one thing Denisha said. But first, I want to talk about, since we just ended with the Parkland Conference, Clarence Thomas was there. And I know it's public, so you can talk about it. So What did he say about the leak? Anything interesting?
Yes. And, I think my takeaway from that was that I think he was deeply troubled by it. I think he really looked at that as a real violation of trust. Even saying things that we are in danger of losing our institutions, and that he really felt, I think he even actually likened it to infidelity. And so it was a real breach. I think it really pained him. And it was something that, I couldn't tell if he had seen that something like this could happen over time. I just know that it actually happening was, I think a little bit of a tremor. So that was definitely notable in how he talked about it.
Was he in good spirits so generally? I mean, or was that like
yes.
such a big? Yeah, he was. Okay.
Oh, I mean, about that.
Or just in general.
No, in general, affable, very approachable. Really, really enjoyed meeting him, talking with him. He was sitting, in the, audience for most of the program, and chatting with whoever's around him. It was really wonderful. And then when he gave his talk, which John Yu interviewed him, who was his clerk and is also with Hoover Institution and is at, I believe, UC Berkeley Law School. That was a great back and forth because they were familiar with one another. And, it really ranged. It talked about, the court then, the court now, a little bit about 30 years ago when he was appointed. But it was a great talk. And as I mentioned in our interview with Denisha, people can find it on C-SPAN. They were there live streaming it, and it is recorded. So it is worth a watch. I think one other thing that I really took away from his talk is he gave this example. We were talking a little bit about affirmative action, and they were, he had a young woman apply to work at the Supreme Court. And as she goes through this whole process, and it isn't until the very end, and she makes it through, that he learns that she's Black. And he said, that is, I didn't know that, please tell this young woman, he says to his staff. And his, that I hadn't known. And so he said, what do you think her reaction was when she learned that? And he said, she was delighted. She had made it on her own resume, her own achievements, her own abilities. And so that was great to hear. That was also a topic of discussion during the conference. We had several panels. It was really over about 2 days. And so that was good. So it was great.
Is there, I'm curious, so this conference is a lot of, for lack of a better word, Black conservatives, or people that are at least identified as Black conservatives in the media, because now they're all white supremacists. Is there a general?
Well, and let me interrupt just that it was organized, but I think people, some of whom identify as a conservative, but not all, and certainly not attended by exclusively conservatives. We did have people all up and down.
Was there the consensus on affirmative action? That it is counterproductive, or that it is a good thing? Was there? I mean, I'm guessing there were discussions on that. Obviously, there's a big case going on.
Yes.
Harvard admissions. We don't know what that's going to be, but
yes, for which, by the way, Justice Thomas was not in the room. For obvious reasons. Yes, there was. I think it's fair to say there would have been consensus that it has outlived its usefulness. There, might have been a couple who were perhaps not as clear cut, although clearly from the panel and the discussion that we had about it is, I think it definitely derails achievement. It's something that and I do remember part of that discussion was also that affirmative action, a lot of time, it is not benefiting low income students. I think it's designed to get numbers up in certain categories. And, maybe the assumption is that, this is going to benefit people who otherwise would not have had an opportunity. Sometimes it is benefiting people who come from immigrant families who are quite well off. Sometimes it's coming, so it's just, you really need to dig beneath the surface to see what's really happening. And then also there's the timing issue. It was intended to be a short-term benefit or program, and it's
60 years later.
I think past its sell-by date personally, but it was, so no. And I think probably it would be fair to say that I think most people kind of agreed that it is time to go. But that will definitely be, a decision for the courts.
Yeah. So you mentioned also in the conversation with Denisha, Shelby Steele.
Yes.
I don't remember if I said this on an earlier podcast. So I wrote the letter to my fellow parents at Brearley School, which is how I became this accidental activist. I actually considered sending his book, White Guilt, along with that letter. And I ultimately decided I should have. I only decided I didn't want to kind of spend the money. I already spent the money on the postage because I mailed a letter. I didn't email it, but I did because I thought that was an incredibly powerful book. That's the only book I've read by him. But to what you and Denisha talked about a little bit on this podcast earlier, he saw real racism, and he makes such a strong distinction between what was real racism, what was real systemic or institutional racism, and what we have now, which in, I think, his view and in my view, and I got criticized for this in my letter, what we have today is not systemic or institutional racism. Racism will always be there till the end of human beings, probably for lots of reasons, but it is no longer systemic or institutional. And I thought he makes such a powerful distinction. And I'm curious if that's something, you alluded to it with the hospital example. Is that, that to me, that's so powerful. And I'm curious, get your take on that.
So yes, I think he'd agree that we are past the point of institutional systemic racism. I think one of the takeaways for me, he also participated in the Black Power movement, and this is all outlined in White Guilt and Shame. And actually, there's a very good story, and I forgot which one it's in, about when he had his moment leaving that movement. Because I think he realized, they were, he and Rita, his wife, were over in Africa, and they were meeting with exiles, people who had been exiled from the US because of their activism. And so he kind of realized how incredibly sad they were and almost homesick. And he kind of realized that this is empty. Yeah. And that was the beginning of the shift for him. So no, I think he would absolutely agree with that. And I think he would say, he talks a lot about it is a mindset, and that, with freedom comes responsibility. And Denisha alluded to this, like his moment, we are free. Now, what are you going to do? Yeah. And so, and he definitely writes with that in mind. And one thing too, that I really enjoy about his writing is his love for his parents. They made such an impression. We're both great people, civil rights activists, and that is something that's you can see where his inspiration comes from.
And it goes the other way. It goes to the third generation, because you and I both know, and you know him better than I do, but I've gotten to know him a little bit. His son, Eli Steele,
yes,
is a documentary filmmaker, terrific human being.
Absolutely.
So it's, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It goes, I guess, at least 3 generations there.
Amen to that. Yes.
All right. Last thing to talk about, unless you have something else. I want to go back to something that we talked to Denisha about a little bit. It's a little bit controversial, and I'd love to get your view, and I'll give mine maybe. But do you think any kid can benefit from being in the right school environment? There was the famous study, I think it was in the early 60s, 63 or 64, the Moynihan report. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a famous Democratic senator from New York. And unexpectedly, the report said that, educational achievement was not based mostly on, it was not correlated with race or how much money was spent in the school. It was mostly correlated with family structure. If you have 2 parents, if you have a stable family life, you tend to have much better educational achievement. So Denisha changed schools, went from a low performing public to a much, I guess, higher performing, it sounds like, private school, maybe it's faith-based private school, but she also changed family structure. She talked about going to live with, her godmother. And what do you think? I mean, we talk about, is better schools the panacea? Or are these societal problems much broader than that?
Yes, I think every student has potential. Every child has potential. I am a firm believer in that. Is school alone the solution? I would say no. I think there are going to be kids need more than just a school environment in order to help them thrive. And I think the research says that, I think common sense says that. So the question becomes, okay, so then what do you do? And I am a firm believer is that you don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. You do as much as you can to empower parents to make the best fit choice for their kids in school. That could be public, it could be private, it could be charter, it could be homeschool. But I think that is the direction that we go. And by the way, these education options get better with a little competition. And I think that is absolutely
that's the
healthy.
magic of the free market, right?
Absolutely, it
competition
is.
makes everything. Raises the bar broadly.
Exactly. So I think that is, so my answer is yes. You do get into the situation. Okay. So, all right. Yes. Family, all the data says family structure is really important, critically important, in fact, but not all kids have that family structure.
Right.
Denisha is a great example. It can happen where another adult steps into a child's life and helps remedy, some of the shortcomings. And I think that absolutely happens. It probably happens more than we know. And I think you can still extol a goal, but while dealing with conditions on the ground and dealing with them lovingly and in ways and where you can help perhaps change it in the next generation, and that we should always be aiming high. And yes, I think we have to believe that every kid has potential too. I don't want to live in a world where that becomes not the case. And so, call me a naive optimist or whatnot, but I'll take it happily.
Well said. Let's end on the optimistic note. We do need school choice. We do need better schools. It's not the panacea. It's not the only issue I think that we have, but it is one of the things that we absolutely need to focus on to improve our country and our children. So on that, we'll say goodbye. Thank you for everybody listening to Take Back Our Schools this week. We had a terrific conversation with Denisha Merriweather. We'll be back soon for another terrific conversation. As always, if you like us, and we appreciate if you would share us and give us a good rating wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. On behalf of myself and my co-host Beth Feely, we'll see you soon on another episode of Take Back Our Schools.
Thanks, Andrew.
Ricochet. Join the conversation.